Hello, everyone. This is the final lecture in the Age of Trump or Trump in the World series. I hope it will end happily. That's up to me, of course. But you'll see, I'll give you an outline of the talk in just a moment. Geopolitics of global energy and climate change in the age of Trump. That's a sizable topic in length and in depth of subject matter. So we shouldn't waste any time and get started. The first thing I want you to know about this is that I will check and make sure you are seeing what I want you to see, and it looks like you are. First thing I want you to know is that there'll be some surprises in this. And I will tell you why in a moment. There will be some interesting pictures. Pictures help. There will be some reliable and helpful commentary from yours truly. And there will be a welcome, but nonetheless troubling conclusion. A very important part of this. Now, misunderstandings and myths about energy and climate change and the overlap between them and the interconnections are at present and over the past couple of decades even have been a serious problem for real progress. I want to make that clear in the beginning. These are very highly charged areas, charged emotionally, symbolically, politically, culturally, and just about every other way that you may think of. So they are very difficult to discuss, and tempers can range pretty high. Exaggerations are quite common, but unfortunately there are some myths that have become very widespread, and I want to deal with those. I thought the best way to proceed is to try and deal with 5 of these myths, probably at about 10 minutes per myth. I'm not sure if Mr. Trump understands how important this subject is, so I hope he will visit us at some point, because this lecture is for him too, and his idea of unleashing American energy and creating a new era of energy dominance. We will mention that a little bit more. This is myth number 1. Myth number 1 is very, very common, particularly in the United States but in large portions of Europe as well. This myth is that fossil fuels are decreasing in global use, and they are being replaced by renewables, dominantly wind and solar. This should be a source of celebration. And it should be something that we will support, we should support, if we are concerned about climate change. If we are not concerned about climate change, then this might translate more in the way of a disaster if we follow this line of thinking or this worldview. But it is a myth, and it is a very serious myth, and it is a myth that needs to be undone. And I will show you one image right here that tells you the truth of global energy use in the present world. This is the reality of global energy use today. And what I want to draw your attention to is the scale of fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. They continue to make up more than 80% of global energy, not including what we call traditional biomass. Traditional biomass meaning basic firewood, but definitely for less developed portions of the world. I should tell you also, give you a little bit of information about my background. I'm a geoscientist. I worked in the oil and gas industry for about 25 years before coming to the Jackson School in the early 2000s. I've been teaching courses on energy since that time, and more fully educating myself as well. I've written a number of books about energy. I write a regular column for a journal called Global Policy, which comes out of Durham University in the UK and is associated with the London School of Economics. It's an interesting, has an interesting view on the world, a little bit different than some of our think tanks here. And I've been doing that for about 2 years now. So I want to call your attention back to this. And I also would like to emphasize another aspect to the fossil fuel universe here, and that is that they are all growing. They are not being replaced by anything. It could be said, particularly in the case of natural gas, that the global market has not matured yet. In fact, natural gas has a very, very young global market. It was regionally dominated. They had regional markets, East Asia, Europe, Africa, South America, North America, until very recently, until about 2015, 16. Oil's had a global market for quite a while. None of these sources, including coal, are decreasing at present. They are decreasing in certain areas, and we will talk about that in a moment, but globally they are not. And so the idea that the fossil fuels are on the way out is a fiction. I think it's even worse than a myth. It's a fiction. And I would ask that you not pursue that any longer. Now, that being said, I would also draw your attention to the 3 other sources: the renewable energy, the hydro, and the nuclear. These are all non-carbon energy sources. Renewables there means overwhelmingly wind and solar. That's where most of the money has gone into so far. Hydro is increasing. There's a lot of interest in that in a number of places, particularly South America, Southeast Asia, and in large portions of Africa. Nuclear is kind of holding steady, though it is its future is somewhat tentative. But put together, these 3 sources are significant. And were they to grow significantly, they would make a real dent. But if your focus is on wind and solar, you will see that they have an enormous way to go. And if you put renewables on the bottom of this graph and you put oil, gas, and coal right above it, and hydro and nuclear above that, you would get a better idea of how much has to be moved and changed for renewables to really gain a very significant portion. Now, this is energy use. This is not energy capacity, okay? A lot of the promotion for wind and solar is based on capacity. They do not get more than about 30% of their capacity. Solar doesn't usually get more than 20%. So this is an important factor, but let's move ahead here. This is reality as it exists in the world today. Okay, this is a very unfortunate fact: declining coal use in the West. Now you see this on the lower portion of the graph. The 2 lowermost intervals are North America and Europe. This is about coal use. South and Central America do not make much use of coal. But you see that there's been a significant decline. It's actually about, overall, especially from the early 90s, is about 30% or more. But you see that that has been erased by the massive increase in coal use in Asia. And while it looked like that was going to dip down and actually begin to fall in 2016 and 2017, no, coal use turned around and is on the increase again. Now, this is only through 2018. and 2019, coal use made another increase. The outlook for 2020 is unknown. Very hard to predict, but China, who is the main player here, has almost come back to its pre-pandemic energy demand level. So the emissions from China are not going to go down in any significant way. Now, the countries who have been increasing coal use are many. China has been one of them, but India has been increasing its coal use even more. Japan and South Korea, yes, particularly for Japan after it shut down all of its nuclear power, which accounted for up to a third of Japan's, more normally about 20% to 25%, but at certain times as much as a third of Japanese electricity. And it had to import things very quickly. Not enough natural gas was available, and so it turned to coal. And Japan has been building coal plants. Now, Indonesia, Pakistan, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Turkey are all emerging economies that have been increasing their coal use significantly. Indonesia has so much coal that it is actually exporting it significantly. So we are not looking at a profound decrease in global coal use at the present time. Very unfortunate, but very important fact to be aware of. In terms of oil, which is the second most emitting or carbon producing fuel, the geopolitical world is focused on that one resource more than any other. And so when you look in the newspapers, you'll see more about the oil market than you ever will about the gas market or the solar market or the coal market even. And there are a number of reasons for that. That is not unreasonable. One is that it powers over 90% of global transport. And thus it is essential to every economy. It also powers every military on the planet, and thus it is a key issue for national security and for energy security, but national security. It is also the source of countless consumer products, including the entire universe of digital products, electronics, the sports world, the toy world, the medical apparatus world, and many, 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 many other things. Our societies, our modern societies, are saturated with the things that come from oil. Can they be produced from other sources? Yes, they can, but much more expensively at this point. Oil has no real alternatives. And this is a major fact for that source alone. Natural gas has many alternatives, and so does coal. Oil does not yet. We are working on that as a planet. So that's as far as we'll go for the first 10 minutes. Thank you for listening. I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to start with myth number 2 here. Myth number 2 is a big one, just like myth number 1. This myth is often unspoken, but it is widely held. If you begin to talk to people about their views of global energy, you'll find that this eventually emerges in one form or another. And the idea here is that Western countries are the center of world energy, just as they have been for the last 200 years, since the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And they are almost entirely responsible for the climate problem, and that won't change. I mean, that's essentially what has happened in the last 200 years, is the countries that that industrialized first, really are the ones who put all the carbon into the atmosphere, and the accumulated volume of carbon in the atmosphere is overwhelmingly due to the Western countries. And I know some of you are saying, how is this possibly a myth? Well, we'll take a look and find out. Let me again just make sure that you are seeing the correct screen, and it looks like you are. All right, let's address the second part of that first. In fact, let me make sure that yeah, okay, good. Now, this comes from a very valuable information site called Our World in Data. They have lots of information on many, many, many different subjects, not just energy. They have a very extensive COVID-19 page. If you are interested in more information than you could possibly absorb, that would be a place to go. But they talk an awful lot about the nature of the world. And they make things very clear and direct. In any case, it turns out that the accumulated volume of carbon dioxide emissions, but also other greenhouse gases, is going to be handed over to the non-Westernized countries very, very soon. This is a big change, and we will come back to this as well. Now, in this graph, what you are seeing is the declining amount of carbon dioxide that remains in the atmosphere that is due to Europe, the EU 28, at the very bottom. The somewhat growing amount from the rest of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe early on, and then also from the other countries of Europe that are not part of the EU. From the US, whose contributions peaked in from about World War II into the 1960s. And then above that, you see the rest of the world. I want to point something out here. So if you look at the scale on the left, the y-axis, and you look at it very carefully and you divide it up, I thought I would come to 51% rather than 50% because that's a majority. And if you continue the emissions trends that are put out by the non-industrialized or less industrialized world, you get to this intersection here. You see where 51% line is intersected by the trend line from the non-Westernized countries. And if we draw that down and bracket it and try and estimate how many years, that's what we come up with, about 12 to 15 years. So what, right? So what? Well, what turns out to be pretty important because it's at that particular what, that particular 51%, that it is no longer truthful to claim that the West is responsible for climate change any longer into the future, because at that point, the abundance of greenhouse gas emissions will be higher in terms of the contribution from the rest of the world. And from that point on, it's going to change. It's going to increase significantly, even if that trend line decreases, flattens a bit. So this is really a major change. The West will not be able to be blamed any longer for what happened. And the whole consciousness about who is responsible and who isn't will need to alter. The world will need to accept finally that everyone is now a contributor, almost at equal levels. Will this change philosophy of various countries in terms of their energy use and their emissions? That's somewhat doubtful. Let me put it that way. There are many other more short-term interests involved. But it does change the reality of the situation, and that can be an important factor. Now, these are oil tankers and cargo ships that are headed into the Straits of Malacca, near that Singapore in the background, and they are going into the South China Sea. This is meant to show you the traffic that exists in this narrow zone, marine transport zone, but also how large it is going into a very conflict-ridden area of the world, the South China Sea, about 85% of which has been claimed and partially seized by China at this point. Um, the point here is that I'd like to say is that a lot of these tankers, even 10 years ago, when they would have come out of the Persian Gulf, would have made a right turn towards the US and Europe. But today they make a left turn. They head to Asia because Asia is the center, especially East Asia, Japan, South Korea, China, also Taiwan, and then Southeast Asia, and of course, India. That is the center of the energy world today. The West is no longer in charge or in control. Its demand does not drive the system any longer. That changed about 2008, 2009, and by 2010 and 11, it was solidified. So the center of energy demand is now shifted to Asia. This is a major change in modern history. I don't think you read about it in the newspapers. It sort of passed them by, but it is a very large change and a very important one from a climate point of view, and certainly from the point of view of the oil market. Okay. This is a graph showing the increase in VLCCs. Now, what is a VLCC? Well, the VLCC is a very large crude oil carrier. And what you are looking at here is, again, counts of, these are, by the way, large tankers carrying up to 1 million barrels or more. And there are ULCCs, ultra large, but the VLCCs are around 1 million to 1.2 million, and then a bit lower than that also. You can see the increase in traffic, and this has everything to do with China's increasing appetite for oil. And I should say this is not just cars, this is trucks and trains and airlines as well. This is the period from about 2003 up to about 2013, and then a little bit higher than that, when China's industrialization was very rapid and using an awful lot of diesel fuel for all of its construction equipment. Okay, so that's our second part, and we'll return in a moment with myth 3. So we're at myth number 3 now. Welcome back. This is a very important one that is quite common, particularly on the in the environmental side of things, but not only there. Let me check once again just to make sure. Yes, you are seeing the panda. This is the Panda Solar waving hello. From China. China has a number of these, in fact, and there may be one that's being built that China's building in Sri Lanka before long. Very friendly, friendly solar. That's nice. So the idea is that China is leading a clean energy revolution, and you'll see this. You've probably seen it already, but there's a fair chance that you'll be seeing it again. This is a real myth. And it's important to start with the idea of the one belt, one road. These are the Chinese characters that are used. They are actually important because the one belt is straightforward, and so is the one road. This is a road. They could have used a different character that meant way. In Japanese, it's michi, which means the way or the road or an avenue, but it also carries larger meanings of a path, a way forward. But this is about concrete realities, and so it's well named. I say many roads because there are many roads, and they've been increasing over time. Do not be fooled by the claim that it is a new Silk Road. It is nothing like the Silk Road at all. The Silk Road, over its length, was often just a dirt trail in many parts, but it was a trail that was important and still crossed by animals. And it was a very important link, but it was not always operating. It was often very dangerous. A particularly peaceful time was when the Mongols had essentially destroyed all the cities in Central Asia, many of them, and then a significant number of them all the way to Baghdad, including Baghdad, but had created a peace, a Pax Mongolia, as they call it, and that's spelled P-A-X, not O-C-K-S. In any case, China's plans are extraordinarily different. Part of those plans are going to involve a high-speed rail to Moscow and then into Europe. There is a maritime version of the roads that will presumably create a number of ports through the Indian Ocean, including through the Bay of Bengal and then in the Arabian Sea and then the East African Sea as well. And then most recently, there is a new Arctic portion of this. And the Arctic portion has two major goals. One is to move cargo, particularly from the White Sea area and then Europe, and then to move liquefied natural gas and potentially oil later on from major facilities that have been built here in the last 5 years. These are the biggest liquefied natural gas export terminals in the world as yet, though there are some very large ones in Australia that have yet to be completed. But this is the Yamal Peninsula and the Ob Estuary, the biggest estuary in the world. And China invested in this in a major way. Russia built a city of 30,000 to populate and operate this gigantic facility. And it also built several icebreaker LNG tankers, liquefied natural gas tankers. And they have been delivering oil by the Arctic route of the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, for more than a year now. And as the ice melts back further and further in the springtime, that route will open up even more. This saves a considerable amount of time for the transport of LNG to China. So when we are talking about our topic here, we are talking about the Belt and Road Initiative for that reason, and then for another one, that China is building many power plants along its BRI routes. And what kind of power plants are they? That becomes very important. So to break it down very simply, in Pakistan being a close ally of China in many ways, it's mostly hydro and coal. In fact, it's all hydro and coal at present. And we'll see some plants in a moment. In Southeast Asia, it is majority of hydro, of dams, significant dams being built, and some coal plants as well. And in Africa, it's a little bit of everything. There's hydropower, coal power, natural gas, renewables, and even some oil burning power plants that they are putting in. So no one is building power plants the way the Chinese are around the world. No one. No one comes close. And China has seized this as an opportunity, which it is. Unfortunately, the US is not involved, and Europe is not particularly involved either. This is a major effort to give many countries what they want, which is electricity. Power generation is the core of increasing energy use worldwide, particularly in emerging economies. What they want is more power more electricity. That is essential to modern life, and it is essential to the knowledge economy that represents the more advanced forms of modern life and the more advanced economies as well. Okay, now here are the biggest BRI power plants. These are 8 of them. I could add a lot more, but I wanted to show you. This is a coal plant that was built in Pakistan between 2015 and 2019. It is a big plant. These are all very big plants. You'll notice that the smokestack is not steaming or it's not belching. Most of these coal plants today are not the kinds that produce enormous amounts of particulate matter that form the deadly smog that we are used to seeing in Chinese cities. Those were early plants that China built that had and factories that had absolutely no pollution controls. The plants that it is building now do have electrostatic precipitators that are able to take all that particulate matter out of the air. So they're more advanced, but it does nothing for the carbon emissions. Those are just as large. So here are some of the plants, most of them in Pakistan, with the biggest of all in Indonesia. We see there's a solar plant, and that's 1 gigawatt of solar. That's a big plant. But you have to divide that 1 gigawatt by 5 because you're only getting 20% of that. That's the capacity factor for solar at present. So you're only getting 250 megawatts. Still, that's a good size solar plant. But then you've got hydro in Pakistan, and then you've got coal plants, coal, and coal. And then a very, very large hydro plant in Indonesia, larger than the Grand Coulee, which is the largest hydro plant in the US. It has been ever since it was built. These are really large facilities, but they are mostly coal plants. And the fact that they do not produce the same level of air pollution that earlier plants did does not mean anything good for the climate, because there is this idea of making a clean coal plant in the Hassyan power facility in United Arab Emirates. It is presumably clean coal ready, but the clean portion of it is not hooked up, not fulfilled. Okay, this is a map showing you where some of the areas are that China has built coal plants recently within Asia and Eastern Europe. It does not show Africa. But you can see that these are very widespread. Not all these countries are part of the Belt and Road Initiative, including those in Southeast Asia. But there is a lot of coal in the world. It is cheap, it is easy to move, and it is very quick to build coal power plants. And a number of these countries, such as Vietnam and the Philippines and Turkey and Bangladesh, are very hungry for more electricity. And China has the expertise to build them quickly. This is something, we'll end with this. This is a longer part of the total lecture. I need to go over this with you. It would require a course of itself to deal with this. You are probably used to hearing that clean energy means only wind and solar, possibly geothermal and tidal power, and maybe ocean power, which is not quite, ocean power being not quite commercial as yet. This is a blinkered view. It is not an energy view, it is a political view. It wishes to exile all other forms And to build, it has a vision of society in it that is purified of pretty much all the sources that were used up until very recently. I would insist that this is the case. Among energy experts, people who spend their lives studying energy and looking at energy policy, energy realities, and the climate issue that the world is dealing with, the consensus is very different from this, and it has become stronger over time, the consensus. Climate demands thinking in terms of non-carbon energy, not renewable energy only, non-carbon energy. Wind and solar are the weakest sources that we have. They are fluctuating and they are limited by weather. Fluctuating means they are unreliable, minute to minute, hour to hour. It sometimes. Obviously, there are other times when they are very reliable, particularly solar. But that is not reliable day to day, week to week, or season to season. The other dimension that has been too little admitted is that countries vary immensely in the renewable energy potential they have. Some countries do not have any wind potential. They may have some solar potential, but they have no wind potential. And the solar potential comes and goes. Any countries that are of high latitude will have very, very weak solar capabilities. Iceland is very fortunate in that it has enormous amounts of geothermal, and also, which by the way is a very underutilized source worldwide, um, and hydro. Um, and yet Iceland has a large fishing fleet which runs on marine a refined petroleum product, marine fuel. So they have a pretty high carbon per capita level, even though their electricity is generated 100% essentially by hydro and geothermal. So countries vary enormously, and solar and wind are not going to be able to do it for every country. It is very doubtful whether they can do it for any country. They have not run any country so far more than a couple of days, maybe even a week. We have mega cities and we have enormous industrial facilities that need lots of heat, not just electricity. I would insist on this very much. The idea that would expel nuclear, I think, is extraordinarily foolish. But I understand that that is still a source that many in the West are frightened of. I would also insist that that people do a little bit more studying of that, but that's not what this course is about. It is the largest and most reliable source of non-carbon electricity that we have. And it has killed the fewest number of people, even against wind power, of any major source in the past 75 years. Okay. The point to all of this is that the world needs a diversity of sources for a diversity of countries and situations. That's how the world can be flexible and adaptable and stable in terms of its energy needs and energy supply. The idea that just one source or two sources will run the entire world is a fantasy, and a dangerous one, because it draws attention and focus away from other capabilities, other technologies, including future technologies like fuel cells. Okay, so that's the end of number 3. I will be back in a moment with number 4. Okay, we're back again. I think I will make this one a bit shorter to compensate for the last one. Myth number 4 tells us that China, the US, and Europe are the largest carbon emitters, and they must be the key areas for our climate concerns. That's where we need to focus. on those three areas. If we can reduce emissions there, they will set the pattern, and we will be dealing with the majority of the problem. Okay, this map shows CO2 emissions between 2015 and 2016. This is World Mapper. Each country is shown in terms of its swollen or shrunken size in terms of the volume of its emissions. So you see China and Europe and the US as the largest. World Mapper is an interesting place. They do this with all kinds of data. Okay, so let me check and make sure you are, yeah. Okay, good. All right, now this is a big graph with lots of information on it, and I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. There are three eras of energy use that have revealed themselves for the rest of the century. Were things to change significantly, or were they to even continue the way it is, the way things are, with a slow decrease in carbon energy? This really has much more to do with energy demand than it does with energy supply and consumption directly. So these are patterns of energy demand again. So one of the things I want to point out to you, this is another major historical change, very, very important. And again, not noted often enough. If you notice, energy era number one is the era that lasted from 1800, the beginning, or let's call it the beginning in terms of coal use. The Industrial Revolution really began with water power. Lasting from that time, 1800, up till about 2005. And at 2005, the energy demand from the OECD countries, the club of wealthy countries, pretty much has plateaued. And in some places like Japan, it has decreased significantly. The United States has continued to increase at a slight level. And that's not all due to people buying SUVs, although that definitely adds to it. But as our population increases, we might see further growth in energy level, but and as we go to, but not significantly. Certainly not like era two countries, which are China and India, and then the rest of Asia. That era will last somewhere around 60 to 70 years. That era has begun. It began, as I mentioned before, in about 2008, 2009, right in the middle and right after the financial crisis, during which energy use by the OECD countries went down significantly, and much more than it did in China. So era two is looking as if it will continue. What you're seeing there, China, the dark blue, their demand will likely peak within the next 10 to 15 years. So by the mid 2030s, it could be before that. That has a lot to do with their turn from major heavy industry to a knowledge economy. So they'll be using a lot more of electricity than they will be running steel plants or heavy manufacturing plants. You see that India and the rest of Asia still has a ways to go before they come close to peaking. But when they begin to turn down in the second half of this century, the remaining part of the world, particularly Africa and portions of, and some of the poorer countries in South America and also in Southeast Asia, such as Cambodia and Laos, will pick up, and they will become the center of energy demand. That means demand for new energy services. And so what we'll be looking at by that time will be less energy production overall in the world. Uh, by that time, the OECD countries' energy, both due to demographic changes, aging societies, um, and uh, um, population decrease, um, and efficiency gains will have been decreasing most likely for a number of decades, and Asia will not be long behind that. By the last quarter of this century, it is very likely that the world will be using a significantly less amount of total energy than it will, let's say, by about 2035, at which point global energy may even peak. This is interesting, and you know, it's a prediction, and free predictions are often worth what you pay for them. But it's a reasonable guesstimate. Let's see. So this is a country you don't often think about in terms of emissions. And to a certain degree, that makes sense. Russia is not one of the major emitters in the world. Indonesia is much more serious than Russia is, but Russia has another side. Russia is the largest exporter of carbon fuels by far. It is the colossus of exporting oil, gas, coal, and wood pellets. You haven't heard that much about wood pellets, have you? Wood pellets are widely used in Europe and also in the United States and Canada. They are claimed to be renewable, but a lot of them come from trees. And trees are not necessarily renewable, and they take a century or more to grow back. Wood pellets do not have a great claim to being renewable on the time scale that we normally apply to natural flows of energy to earn that title. Again, renewable is a political title. It's not just a descriptive title. These oil, gas, coal, Russia exports mainly to Europe and to East Asia. It is, some of you may have heard that Russia kind of has a stranglehold on gas and oil to Europe particularly. But it's important to realize that Europe has a stranglehold on Russia in return. They're actually in a dance. Russia depends on Europe enormously for the income it gets by selling its oil and gas and coal. Russia plans to build as much as about 12,000 miles of pipelines by the mid-2020s. I don't think it will do that. It does not have the capital, but we'll see. It has big plans. The only thing that Russia doesn't export right now are renewables, and Russia is not interested in renewables. It doesn't have huge solar. It does have wind potential, but that's mostly in Siberia, which is a long ways from population centers. And we're not talking, you know, just hundreds of miles. We're talking thousands of miles. It does have enormous rivers, but again, they're most of which drain to the Arctic. But again, they are very far away from population centers. The one exception is the Amur River, which forms the border between China and Russia in the Far East. And dams that Russia has planned there are almost a dozen. A few have been built, would be not to supply all that electricity to Russia, but mostly to sell it to China. Okay. So we are at myth number 5. Hopefully this was a little bit shorter. I'll see you again in a moment. Hello, we're back again with our final myth, myth number 5. This is a myth today. It was a myth in 1969 and 1967 when the famous book, or perhaps 66, the population bomb came out. The idea that the Earth is overcrowded has been around for a lot longer than just the last 50 years. And this goes back to Mr. Thomas Malthus and his view of population growing much more quickly than food production and leading to famines. So we are talking about it more in terms of carrying capacity of the Earth, in terms of resources. So you'll note that cartoon at the top there sort of gives that same message. Now, what does the bottom mean? Well, you'll remember that Mr. Trump felt that our country, the United States, was full and had no more room for anyone else. That's sort of an unfortunate message to send to pregnant women, but perhaps he'll amend that at some point. In any case, this is a very widespread view, and I've had to argue even with people at UW in the atmospheric sciences and some other places. It's a view that has been around, as I said. It's a traditional view that, and you will find it in a recent and highly controversial film done by Michael Moore and his friend Jeffrey Gibbs called the Planet of the Humans, which you can see for free at the Planet of the Humans .org, com, net, IOU, whatever. So let's look at this myth very quickly. I want to go through this pretty quickly and then end up with our final welcome but troubling conclusion. So this is a very simple. I want to check this one last time. Thank you for your patience. This is a very simple demonstration that the worry about population is a worry about something else. It's not so much a worry about the number of people, it's really more a worry about the waste of resources and the improper or unequal distribution of necessary resources for human life on the planet. That is really what it was always about, back to Mr. Malthus and even before. And that is a real concern, and that cannot be denied. That is quite clear in this image here. What would it take to bring one up and the other down to each other's level, or to meet in the middle at a reasonable level of resource utilization? But the point here is that population per se is not the problem. Factors that affect energy use. And this is in approximate order. Why do I say approximate? Because countries are very different. Economic growth, the rate of economic growth in a country is extremely important in terms of energy use. It is still the closest parameter of a country that is directly associated with energy use. Increasing economic growth means increasing energy use. What energy? Well, that depends on what kind of economic growth it is. In China's case, it means mostly more oil for transportation, but also more power generation for electricity, most of all. In some other countries, it will mean more electricity beyond everything else. But in some countries, it will mean transportation, or it'll mean heating for residences at low latitudes. So again, diversity among the countries. Next in line is the technological level the country is at. Is it very basic? Because then the energy use will be quite low. If it's quite high, then the efficiency of its energy consumption will be pretty good or very, very good. So its energy demand will actually be lower. But if it's in a very heavy industrial period, then its energy demand will be higher, more intense. And this has to do with the structure of an economy. Is it mostly agriculture? Is it agriculture versus industry? Is it industry overwhelmingly, or has it moved to a service economy like much of the more advanced countries? So that has an awful lot to do with the energy demand. And then population comes in because it's very important. Once the people increase in a country that is at a fairly high technological level, then the energy demand is going to go up. Yeah, absolutely. And if it's in a country of very heavy industry, it's going to go up significantly. But there's another factor, and that's government policy, taxes, regulations, standards. These have real impacts, very powerful impacts, and they cannot be ignored. So there are a lot of factors that deal with energy use and that also the amount of waste and certainly the amount of, on the other side, of efficiency. So this is a final message. This is not the final conclusion, but because we were breaking myths, or busting them if you prefer, this seemed an appropriate message to present. But I'd like to end with this, because this really is the way things really do look in a very serious, realistic worldview. Humanity will deal with climate change, and we will deal effectively with it. I can tell you this, we have the money, or I should say we have the wealth, and we have human capital, and we have the technology and the innovation and the inventiveness to deal with the climate problem. We do not have all the tools we need now, but we can invent many more, and they are on the way, a fair number. But this is going to take time. It is not just about technology. It is about politics and culture and economics, and it is about ideas. Why did China use so much coal and generate so many emissions? And why is India doing the same? Why are all these countries increasing their coal use? They know that it adds to the climate change problem because they have it. They have coal. Indonesia has lots of it. India has mounds of it. China has mountains of it. So does Turkey. And Australia has enormous amounts of it. Pakistan has significant amounts of it. This means energy security in terms of they look at the world. Use it. If they can use what exists within their borders, if they do not have to import it, then it is more secure. That turned around and really bit China hard, and it is biting India pretty hard right now too, in terms of public health and resistance and dissent, and on national reputation. But it is a bad idea. It is a very destructive idea. So ideas have real power in this domain too. Nonetheless, humanity will deal effectively with climate change through energy change, through adaptation, and through what is called resilience as well. But this is going to take many decades, and there are going to be real casualties. We will not make the 2-degree limit of global near surface average temperature. We will probably not make the 3-degree either. So there are going to be some serious impacts from climate change. But humanity will deal with this, and I'd like to leave you with that. Thank you for listening, and I welcome your questions. So long.